Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Roll call, please, Mrs. Burns. Present.
Mr. Cirillo,
Here.
Mr. Allen,
Present.
Mrs. Bowman,
Here.
Mr. Covas is absent with prior notice, Mrs. Lafferty,
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez,
Here.
Mr. Sporny,
Here.
and Mr. Sullivan is also absent with prior notice. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Can everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The board met in executive session this evening prior to this meeting to discuss matters of employment, issues related to labor relations, the purchase or lease of real property, matters related to litigation, and matters related to school safety and security. Mrs. Burns, any announcements?
No announcements.
Mr. Bowman, Superintendent's Report.
Thank you, Ms. Hombach. Just a few quick things. On March 29th, the district held our annual STEAM Expo at Neshaminy High School, and it was another tremendous success. Thank you, Mr. Jeanette, for organizing the event, and to all of our staff that participated in pulling it all together. We estimate there was about 800 students in attendance with their families. It was a packed house. Over 40 community organizations and businesses participated in the event, in addition to our own students that presented many of their own projects. We saw a lot of kids and a lot of parents smiling and having a lot of fun, and I'm sure it will continue to grow next year. Back in January, our 6th grade AE class from Pequessing began competing at the Future Problem Solving Qualifiers. They were chosen in advance to compete against the top teams in the state on March 24th. And after competing in the Global Issues Problem Solving scenario, both of our teams from Pequessing were deemed finalists. The final portion of the competition was presenting a skit of their action plan, and one of our teams received a first place in the state competition for their presentation of the action plan. Well done, Pequessing Future Problem Solvers. Yesterday at Tewanka Elementary, Army First Sergeant Chris Thompson surprised his daughter Lydia, a kindergarten student at the school. Sergeant Thompson had been serving overseas and hadn't seen Lydia for several months. Lydia was surprised during an assembly about careers where she spoke about her father being a soldier. So on behalf of the Neshaminy School District, we'd like to thank Sergeant Thompson for his service and sacrificing his time away from his family. Mr. Stanley has created and posted a really neat video of the surprise on the district's Facebook page, and please take a look if you haven't had a chance. Finally, I received a letter from Carly Kaminsky, a student at Sandburg in Mrs. Toth's 5th grade class. Carly wrote that, quote, "Most of the schools in the district don't have recycling bins in the cafeteria, and most students don't ever recycle," end quote. Carly went on to provide some suggestions about recycling. Carly, we absolutely agree with you that we can do better here in Neshaminy. In fact, our business office has worked with Waste Management to secure recycling bins and containers for all of our buildings, and they have also provided us these pretty informational signs that we will hang around the cafeterias and around the buildings that detail what should be recycled. Carly, thank you for making the Neshaminy School District better. That's all I have, Ms. Hombach.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Do we want to do this now or when we go to approve it? Okay, thank you. Mrs. Burns, is there anybody signed up for public comment?
There were no signups.
Okay. Moving right along. The items for approval at the next public board meeting, which is 4:25 in this room, is 2.01 routine business matters, 2.02 Sunday facility usage, 2.03 acceptance of the 21-22 audit report, and we do have a presentation about that as well, but we'll save that till the end here. 2.04 contract addendum, 2.05 homebound instruction, 2.06 out of district placements, 2.07 overnight trips, 2.08 special education plan, 2.09 summer programs, and 2.10 ESSER's revision. In regards to 2.03, the acceptance of the 21-22 audit report, Mr. Irwin's going to go over the findings of that right now. So take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Madam President. At your place, I've made a copy for you of the audit report, and if we just walk through the document, it's an annual document that we receive. Oftentimes, we don't put a lot of time and effort into it, but I just want to walk you through it and so you understand what our external auditors have provided for us here this evening in this audit report. On the first page is not really, the first two pages are not numbered, but in the very first page, in the second paragraph, it talks about where you get your opinion from the auditor. Usually you're looking for unqualified opinion, but in government standards, we actually don't get an unqualified opinion, but it's not qualified either. What they say is, in our opinion, the accounting financial statements present fairly in all material aspects the respective financial position of the government activities, the business type activities, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining fund information of Neshaminy School District as of June 30th, 2022, and the respective changes in financial position and, where applicable, cash flows thereof for the year ended in accordance with the accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. So that's exactly what we would want to see from the audit, and that's what we get. Pages 3 through 13 are actually the board's opportunity, and I've written this on your behalf, of the management discussion and analysis of the financial condition of the school district. And then you go to page 14, which is the statement of net position. This is done typically for just a balance sheet, if you will, of the statement of cash flows and assets and liabilities. And then you have on page 15 the statement of activities, so that you bond those who are buying your debt and own your debt can review those statements for understanding very closely to what would be done in the private world. The fund financial statements begin on page 16 with our balance sheet for the general fund and the fund accounting part of it, as well as then the reconciliation of the balance sheet. Again, now we're going from government funds to the statement of net position to GAAP, if you will, generally accepted accounting principles on page 17. On page 18, we have the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for the governmental funds. And then we begin to transition then on page 20 to the proprietary funds. And these are your cafeteria funds. This is the operation of the school district that is to be run as a for-profit. It's not to be, it's supposed to at least break even, if you will. So you have that beginning on page 21, or 20 and 21. And then you have the statement of cash flows beginning on page 22 for the proprietary funds. And then on page 23, you begin the fiduciary funds, those funds that you're holding on behalf of the students and others in the community. That includes CORE and those organizations like that. Summer Stock is also supposed to be in there. And then you begin the notes to the financial statements on page 25. Note A is just definitions from page 25 through page 30. And then you begin the cash and investments on page 31. You have items such as interest rate risk and fair market value on page 32. Page 33 begins with note C for taxes. Notes D are the accounts receivable. Note E is the interfund receivables, payables, and transfers. Those interfunds are the general fund and the proprietary funds and the fiduciary funds. Note F is on page 37, talking about capital assets. And on page 35, you find the long-term debt discussed in note G. Note H talks about the long-term liabilities. Note I is the unearned revenue as it relates to the proprietary fund, mostly commodities. Note K then gets into the pension plan, which is all PCERS, and that goes from page 38 on through up to page 42. And then we begin to discuss on note L on page 42, other post-employment benefits, although very few exist today. There was at one time post-employment benefits that were offered by the school district, and we're still accounting for those yet today, even though they have already taken place And we're also accounting for those that will take place in the future under existing contracts. And those carry on through, and this is done by an actuary mostly, but then you get into on page 54, the compensated absences. And then you get into other accounting conditions on note N is risk management, note O, commitments and contingencies, note P, risk and uncertainties, note Q, subsequent events, meaning events that have taken place after June 30, 2022, but before the audit was actually published. And then note E is the interfund receivables and payables and transfers. That takes us to page 57 or 58. We get into the supplementary information, and we have the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund on page 57. This is something often school boards would take a lot of interest in. Did we stay within budget? How did we do? And you can see that during the fiscal year, we added $1 million to the fund balance. We had actual revenues of nearly $192 million, and we had total expenditures of $191 million. So we added $1 million to the fund balance. Our fund balances at the end of the year total $50,749,428. After that, on page 57, you get additional budgetary information. On page 59, you have information that comes from PCERS. This is why on page 59, it's only dated through June 30th, 2021, because we couldn't wait for PCERS to get their books done before we would include them in our financial statements. On page 60, you have the schedule of district pension contributions. Those are actually from our audited statements. And then 61, you get more information related to PCERS regarding the school district's proportionate share of the net other pension and post-employment benefits liability from the pension plan. We have to add those to our balance sheet, those outlays in future years from the retirement service. And then on page 62, we again have documentation related to our contributions on page 62 to the pension plan. And then the last page of this portion of the audit is the changes in the total liability and related ratios for future post-employment retirement benefits. And this comes from your actuary, which is currently Conrad Siegel, and this is updated every other year. We do that on a biannual basis. Then the last portion of the audit is the single audit report. And you can see there that we have the report on internal controls and financial reporting compliance. And you're looking for this to be a clean report, and in fact it is. There are no findings in the report. And they have listed for you the schedule of federal awards. This is, of course, what PDE and the United States Department of Education are looking for to ensure that we have accounted for all our federal awards properly, including Title I, II, III, and IV, IDEA, the PCCD grants, and then, of course, the ESSER stabilization funds that we're getting an influx for in the current year that's being audited, and as well as the subsequent year that we have. And then we go on to, towards the end, again, you have the schedule of findings and question costs on page 9 of the single audit report. Again, there were no findings, no question cost. No material weakness identified, and the internal controls were deemed to be satisfactory in the accounting office. Then they also have identified for you what federal programs that they have reviewed, because they're required to review a percentage of our federal expenditures each and every year. And in the year that was audited, they looked at the Title I, ESSERS, as well as the IDEA and Title II Part A. I know I've gone over that fairly quickly, but that's my life in a cycle, on a one-year cycle. It's a lot of exciting stuff, but that's what we do in the accounting office each year, and we look forward to do it again for you this year.
Mr. Irwin, I have a couple of questions.
Yes, ma'am.
please. Page 18.
18?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So it says fund balances at the end of the year. The 45,318,308, that is for the school being built on this property, correct?
I'm sorry, you're on page 18?
Yep.
I'm sorry, ask the question again, because I'm not sure exactly where you're at.
The bottom of the page, fund balances at end of year.
Yes,
The 45,318,308, it says capital project fund.
yes, those are funds that we've identified for future use as far as the facilities.
And that is for the school here, basically, correct?
No, not all that's for the school. You've identified some of that for bequesting. You've identified some of that for the Fields project. You've identified some of that for, some of it is yet to be identified exactly what it's for, but you have identified it for future capitalization projects. Because what the question you're asking, Ms. Hollenbach, is that amount, the bond amount is not part of the general fund balance. So we have a debt issuance for the school building that we'll be using to use for the new elementary school, which is not, that would not totally expend your fund balance.
Okay, and the other column, what's that for? The 51? Isn't some of that for the fields too?
Yes, that is some of the fields. Now, that the capital project funds makes up some of that general fund, so those two columns are to be taken into consideration. They're not, I'm sorry, they are together, but yes. So now I see your question. So the capital project funds, I take my answer back. The capital project fund is the debt. The general fund is not the debt. It's in addition to the debt. So the capital project fund is the debt that will be used exclusively for the elementary school. Then you have the general fund, which was my previous answer, that has been identified for the bequesting addition, the Fields project, and ongoing capital needs of the school district, roofing, paving, those kind of ongoing needs, as well as some technical infrastructure for the IT and such.
And what is the recommended proposal amount that we keep in the fund balance based on our budget, which our total expenditures is 198?
Yeah, so just in round numbers, if you have a $2 million budget, you should have approximately somewhere between $10 and $12 million in the fund balance, undesignated and ready for unexpected expenditures. Just as you would in your home budget, you would have some reserve and savings that you have, you've identified some for particular needs related to your household budget, but you have, some money that is there in case of an emergency, and that's what that undesignated fund balance would be used for.
So while it looks like on paper we have all of this quote-unquote fund balance, we really do not. And once it's all used for what it's intended for, the fields, the school, the bequesting addition, we will be in line with the percent of fund balance that we have based on our expenditures. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? I forgot because I didn't have the page in front of me. We will also be approving at next meeting, I should say, is 2.11 for a second reading of policies and 2.12, the first responders real estate tax credit. Does anybody have any questions, comments, or concerns about the things that are on the budget? Not on the budget, on the agenda for the next meeting?
Madam President, I do have one correction to make on 211.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, not 211. On the first responders tax credit, on the documentation that's at your place, in the resolution that I attached, I had the value of $750, and I did that from memory. But in reviewing my notes today, the actual amount that we left the committee with was $800. If you recall, the very last thing that was mentioned at that meeting, we upped that from $750 to $800. So that amount will change between now and your voting session in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, next, the committee reports. The Business Operations Committee will be on May 3rd in this room at 6:30, where we will be going over the budget. The preliminary final budget, is that what it's called in May?
It is the proposed final budget.
Proposed final budget will be the hot topic of conversation at the May 3rd Business Operations meeting. So if anybody has any interest in that, come on out. The Educational Development Committee, Mrs. Bowman.
The Educational Development Committee met on March 21st, 2023, and we discussed the following. We went over the special education plan that was presented by Dr. Kane and our district website for review and feedback. The 2023 summer programs were reviewed and recommended by the committee for approval. The ARP and ESERS revision and ESERS 7% grant revisions were presented and recommended by the committee for approval to include 6 MTSS interventionists for 23-24 school year. We approved the revision to the ESERS 7% grant to fund the structured literacy training with AIM Institute. We reviewed and recommended the ELA program for K through 8th grade as HMH into reading and into literature by the committee. That'll be approved for implementation for the 23-24 school year. We reviewed Neshaminy High School's Targeted Support and Improvement, TSI, designation and improvement plan timeline and requirements. And our next meeting, our next meeting will be held May 2nd at 6:30.
Thank you, Mrs. Bowman. The Facilities and Planning Committee meeting, we have a meeting tomorrow. We will be discussing the new school that's being built here. There is a groundbreaking ceremony on the 14th at this location at 4 p.m. 13th. Thursday the 13th at 4 p.m. So that will be discussed tomorrow, as well as where we stand on the Fields project and an update on graduation, as well as the Pequesing addition. So lots of good stuff at tomorrow's Facilities and Planning meeting, if anybody would like to come out for that. Mr. Cirillo.
Our next policy meeting will be held on May 18th at 6:30 p.m. right here in this boardroom.
And the IU?
The IU, actually have a little note here. As you guys have heard me say before, the Bucks County IU runs a Fab Lab in Southampton. But the Fab Lab is not just for kids. Adults can join in a fun event with Ambler Charcuterie on Friday, April 21st from 6:30 to 8 p.m. to discover the art of charcuterie, learn cheese styling, salami rose making, transform fruit into edible art, and perfect pairing skills. Registration fees include your charcuterie foods and instruction from Ambler Charcuterie and a custom engraved slate cutting board created by the Fab Lab team. Details and registration are available on the website.
Sounds like fun. Mr. Sporny, please, the Neshaminy Education Foundation.
Sure. The Neshaminy Education Foundation met here at Maple Point yesterday afternoon. At the meeting, they discussed the results of the Wizards fundraising game on March 11th, which raised over $20,000 for the NEF. The NEF Alumni Committee is preparing nomination procedures for the next Neshaminy Alumni Achievement Awards. Nominations will be accepted later this spring, and the awards ceremony is scheduled for the fall. The next NEF board meeting will be held on Monday, May 8th, 4 p.m. in the C&I Conference Room at Maple Point. Members of the Neshaminy community are invited to attend and participate.
Thank you, Mr. Sporny. Mrs. Lafferty, anything for PSBA?
I do. Fun fact, the Department of Agriculture is working with the Pennsylvania Commonwealth to change nutrition guidelines throughout the state, slated for fall of 2024. They're looking to replace the white breads with whole grain, and they're looking to reduce sugar, and actually they've opened it up for comments. So if you're interested in commenting, Department of Agriculture has 65,000 comments to date. That's closing May 10th, so this is for fall of 2024.
They will be cutting back even more soon, it sounds like. Mr. Allen, the technical school?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Hollenbach. I'd like to point out, as I always do, the students of the month from Neshaminy, ninth grade. We have Sierra Lynch. I'd like to point out, congratulations are in order to 5 of the 11th grade emergency services students and our own Aiden Hullings of Neshaminy. They earned both their Pennsylvania State EMT certification and their National Registry certification, which I understand is a huge accomplishment for a high school student. So congratulations to them. I have Dr. Baski pointed out that April 25th is CTE Day in Harrisburg. He'll be taking 7 to 8 students with him. They are students who placed in the Skills USA competition, and that is primarily a lobbying event to talk to our legislatures about supporting the CTE education throughout the state of Pennsylvania. So we have that coming up. We approved the summer opportunities are real for our life skills students this summer. I am thrilled that, a couple summers we were not able to do that. I believe we had limited program last summer, and I think we're back up to full staff for this summer. So that's good news. I would like to report that the tech school received a $1 million LSA grant, and that money is going to be used to help with our building renovation projects. That's the environmental controls, the fire suppression system, and the roofs. As many of you who attend our own facility meetings know, all of those are big-ticket items. The tech school, of course, depends on our generosity and its renting units in order to maintain that building. So that's a huge get. The NOCTI, which is the CTE assessments for our seniors, is going to be on March 25th and 26th. That is part of their graduation requirements. Keystone, which is the academic assessment portion of their education, is coming up in May. Other than that, I believe that brings me up to date. Then the next meeting is April 24th, 7:30 in the boardroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. That brings us to our second portion of public comment. If anybody has any questions, please approach the podium. Okay, moving right along. Does anybody have any future topics from the board that you would like to have discussed? Okay, board comment. Mr. Bowman, do you have anything that you would like to? No? Anybody else from the board? Any comments?
I hope everyone enjoyed the holidays and the break, and welcome back.
Yes, my kids have struggled the last 2 days getting back up to come to school the last 2 days. If there's nothing else, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Second by Mr. Sorrello. Everybody have a great night. Thank you.